Nancy Johnson. Welcome to Wild Precious Life.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, you and I met briefly at a story point function. I was looking at my calendar. It was probably 2021. There is no reason you should remember me because you were in a swirl of publicity for your first novel, The Kindest Lie, which was busy winning all the awards. And so it's nice to re see you.
It is wonderful to see you too. Yeah, I would say the writing community is just the most special one ever. I was just at an event last night in Waterford, Wisconsin, put on by Reads by the River bookstore, and it was at a restaurant, and there were over 50 readers there, and I just can't tell you how they embraced me and the other two authors who were there with me, Christy Clancy and Nicholas Butler. And I just was overwhelmed. So my heart is still full from last night and the way the readers have really just embraced me and embraced my books.
I always tell people that the writing community is just one big small town.
It
Like
is.
you shouldn't cross people because we're all going to talk. But more importantly, it's kind of Mayberry for like people walking down the street. Everyone remembers you. It is a really bookishly lovely community.
It really is. And so when I
Glad
saw
that's going well.
three women walking into this event and they were all carrying my books in their arms, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know you. I'm not related to you. I didn't pay you, but you're reading my work. So it's such a gratifying feeling.
Absolutely. Well, so now you're on the road, as you're pointing out, with the newest book, which is called People of Means, which I'm sure, like the first one, is going to turn lots of heads. But just in case people haven't been to Wisconsin or they didn't go to Chicago and they haven't seen The Kindest Lie, and I'm not sure how they couldn't because that book was everywhere, and this one is just making the rounds too. But why don't you just tell us some of your story?
Sure. So my first novel was The Kindest Lie, and it's a story of this unlikely connection between a successful black woman engineer and a poor young white boy in a dying Indiana factory town. And I was inspired to write that by the events of 2008 when Barack Obama was elected president, and Facebook was pretty new then, and I saw this huge divide between black and white America playing out in my social media feed, and I really wanted to explore the perspectives of people who are very different from each other, where you haven't walked in that other person's shoes. And so that's why I told the story of this black woman who's searching for the son she walked away from when she was a teenager. And she goes back to her dying Indiana factory town where she grew up to find him. And so we meet her family in that town where so many people are unemployed because industry is gone. Then we also meet the family of this young white boy who's also searching for a mother figure, and his father has lost his job as well. And with all the economic tensions, during the time of that recession, all of the racial animus is just exacerbated because of the financial stress that everyone is going through. And I wanted to explore that, and that was my first novel, and it came out in February of 2021. And like you indicated, it did very well, was reviewed by the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times. It was on Entertainment Weekly's must list and Book of the Month Club pick and a Target Book Club pick. And I could go on, but it got so many accolades. And that was a dream come true because when you're a debut author, you have no idea what to expect from the process. And I was just blown away by the reception that The Kindest Lie got. And so then I got a contract with William Morrow, HarperCollins, for a second book. Yeah, so that was wonderful that they wanted more from me after the first one. And my second novel just came out February 11th of this year. So it's very new and just hit bookshelves. It's called People of Means. And People of Means is a story of this upper middle class black mother and daughter, both of them coming of age at different moments of racial and social reckoning in America. So the mother, Frida, is a student at Fisk University, a historically black university in Nashville in 1959. And she's coming there from Chicago. It's her first time in the Jim Crow South. So she has to decide what to do as the burgeoning civil rights movement is getting started. Is she going to engage or not? So that's the big question for her. And then decades later, 3 decades later, we meet her daughter, Tulip. who is a young public relations professional in Chicago, and she's there in 1992. And the story takes place right after the acquittal of the four officers for the beating of Rodney King. And so she's facing similar questions that her mother faced in terms of how involved or whether or not to get involved or not in activism that's getting going after that particular verdict. And I was inspired to write People of Means, inspired by the events of the summer of 2020 when George Floyd was murdered. And you saw so many people from every background, every racial group, gender, everything get involved in activism, people all over the world. And I was kept thinking, what is it that sparks people to activism? And then a few months later in 2020, in that same summer, Representative John Lewis died. And to me, he was just this larger than life civil rights icon, this older gentleman who's revered. And of course, that's all true. But when he died, I saw a documentary about his life. And they talked about how he was 19 years old on a college campus. He actually went to Fisk University as well. And he's on this college campus at 19 and helping to lead a movement, organizing sit-ins at these five and dime lunch counters. And I kept thinking, what must it be like to be 19 years old? You're trying to get your class schedule together, make friends, date, do all the normal stuff, but then help launch a movement. And so that's how the character of Frida was born, was from that story.
One of the things I loved about this book is that I didn't think that I had more to learn about the civil rights movement. I mean, we studied it in school, and I've seen the documentaries, and I felt I was pretty well versed in the sit-ins and the marches. But I was surprised again and again at the students I met there, especially in Nashville, especially in Frida's storyline. One of the things I was surprised by was her hesitancy. And when I came to think about it, I think we tell ourselves this story, right? When we look at the "I Have a Dream" speech, we have this idea that, oh, in the 1960s, everyone was marching and everyone was protesting, and they were all jumping on those buses and they were walking across the bridges. But honest to goodness, one of the things I really appreciated was the perspective that people came to activism or did not come to activism at their own pace, on their own timeline, with sometimes what the word I'll use is prejudices, but like their families were dead set, and these were Black families, were often like, please don't get involved in that. Just keep your head down. I honestly had never thought about that before.
Yeah, that was something I wanted to explore. I think it's definitely a misnomer that so many people do believe after watching news and documentaries and reading about it that everybody, and particularly if you were Black, you were definitely involved in the movement and you were marching, you had the picket sign, and that just was not the case. I mean, you had quite a few people who were like, this is dangerous work. And so it was scary, and there was a cost to engaging in this work. So that's one reason that some people didn't do it. I was doing an interview with someone else recently, and this woman said she talked with an elderly gentleman who was around at that time, and he said that he did not participate in the activism, but not because he was afraid, but because he's like, look, I would have not been nonviolent, and I would have busted some heads, right, if I had been involved in that. And he's like, it was better for me to just stay my distance from it and let calmer heads prevail, and the people who wanted to really practice civil disobedience in a nonviolent way, let them handle it. So that's another perspective, right, of not getting involved and engaging in it. But certainly in this book, Frida's parents, kind of like you said, were very insistent that we sent you to this revered, esteemed university, to Fisk University, the cream of the crop, to get an education. And that's how you resist. You don't get sullied by activism, but we want you to uplift your community by being excellent. That's how you do it. And then when you succeed and you rise, then your community rises with you.
What was so interesting about that narrative is that Frida, who's the She's the mom in the story, but we see her. The stories are told in parallel, as you mentioned.
Right.
So we're back and forth. We're in Nashville in the 1960s, and we're in Chicago in the 1990s. But given that Frida comes to activism in her own way, in her own time, it was interesting to me that then, as an adult, when she sees her daughter Tulip uh, confronting the Rodney King verdict and becoming involved in marches on the South Side and trying to get publicity to these causes, to not just talk about the violence done against Rodney King, but about Black bodies in their community. Um, it's not like Frida says, "All right, truth to power, good
Go
for
for it.
you." She really hesitates. Were you surprised by the character doing that?
I think I was. Like, so when I write a novel, I don't always know where it's going to go. And as I'm telling the story, I get to know the characters and they speak to me, sometimes to the chagrin of my editor, that I'm not one to necessarily plot things out or outline. But when I'm writing the book, I get to know the characters on a deeper level. And that's definitely something that I did with this book. And so I knew the resistance that Frida met when she was toying with the idea, because she wasn't convinced when she was a college student that she wanted to get involved. In fact, she was more in agreement with her parents that, no, I think I should stay away from this. Because when she stumbles upon her first sit in at a lunch counter, Frida's like, why are these people doing this? Like, these are my classmates. These are the future doctors and lawyers of the world, and they're doing this. Why? You have something much better waiting for you on the other side. You don't need to do this. You can make a grilled cheese sandwich at home, she says, and thinks at least. But then she's pulled between two different love interests in the book who, pull her in different ways, and one of them is a saxophone playing activist who shows her that, there is something to this whole thing and that there's a purpose behind it and a reason to engage. But in spite of all that, later on, when she's a mother, she knows it intellectually, but we often, I think, repeat what we've learned over the generations from our parents, from our families. And the very same things that she heard her parents say is what she's also saying to Tulip, because now she's a mother. Frida's a mother. Tulip is her daughter. And she has the same hopes and dreams for her that her own parents had for her, right? And so she also has the same kinds of fears. And, it may not be fears that there's going to be violence in 1992 that her daughter will get caught up in. There's always that threat. But I think the stakes are much different. In 1992, Tulip is a young public relations professional, and she's in her first job. She's trying to rise in the corporate ladder. And so her mother doesn't want her to jeopardize that. Neither of her parents want her to jeopardize that. And so there are reasons that Frida is repeating the same message to her daughter that she heard from her own parents.
Yeah, I found that fascinating. And I also got to thinking about just parents parents have secrets from their kids. They just do, right? For their own reasons. And as children, we don't always understand them, but it's at least worth acknowledging that our parents were fully formed humans before they had us, right? They had whole stories and histories and wants and needs before they had the babies. And having the babies sometimes changes the story, but they like to hold on to that. So it's not like Tulip necessarily grew up knowing all the activism that her parents were involved with, or in the case of her father, not involved with, right? That despite the fact that Frida knows her parents very well and lives nearby and they have dinner together and she loves them very much, there are whole histories that her parents, that it was never theirs to share.
Right, right. And I always find that to be interesting. And that's a recurring theme that I tend to often address in my books is this idea that we don't really know our parents or our grandparents, the people who raised us. And like you said, we think of them as just this fully formed human, and that we know them as this is my mother, this is my father, but we don't think of them as people that they were young people and that they had to make some of the same choices that we had to make about their careers and their lives. And we don't really know, are they living out their purpose? Are they following their dreams? How did they choose who to love? So there's so much that we don't know. Sometimes we don't ask because I don't know. Sometimes I'm that way with my own parents. My father is deceased now, and there's so many things that I wished that I had asked him that I didn't. I think I was just uncomfortable to getting into some of those conversations with him. I just wasn't feeling comfortable. And I have my mother with me still, but my mother now has Alzheimer's. So there's so much that she doesn't remember, and there are things that I wished I had asked her when she was able to really tell me about those things. And I'm extremely close to my parents, but there's still so much of them that I don't know. I don't know what it was like for them to be, 20 years old, 30 years old, just getting started. And do they have regrets? Things that they didn't achieve. In my first book, The Kindest Lie, we have Mama, a grandmother, who was raising Ruth, her granddaughter. And when Ruth got pregnant at 17, she said, "Leave this baby behind. You cannot keep this baby. We're taking this baby. You leave this baby here, and you go on and pursue your education. Get that engineering degree at Yale, and do not look back." And she was really living out some of her own dreams, things that she didn't get to accomplish. This grandmother dreamed of studying at Juilliard and being a professional singer, but she didn't. And she got stuck in this small factory town and got married and had children and just had that life and never pursued the dreams that she had. But she was going to make damn sure that her granddaughter was able to achieve her dreams. And so it's the same kind of thing that we see with these familial expectations in people of means too.
Yeah, I was surprised when my father, who has also passed away, but when I learned that my father was a C student because
Mm,
he gave us so much pressure to do well in school, how school was the most important thing.
yep.
I just kind of grew up assuming that he'd been good at school, but he'd been lousy at school.
And
And
maybe that's why
right,
he was
right?
pushing you so hard because he's like, nope,
Exactly.
you're not going to do what I did. You're going to exceed what I did.
Exactly. And you're so right about the stories. There are there are moments every week when the person I want to ask is my dad and you can't do it. If I had any advice for my younger self, it would be to like, especially as a writer, learn your parents' stories. I know I went through that time when I didn't want to hear from them and didn't want to listen to them, but I sure wish that I had part of Mother's Day or Father's Day or some holiday where you just set up a recorder and asked or asked along the way, like, why'd you marry mom? Because my mom too is suffering from memory loss. And so she, who I thought would be the keeper of the history, is no longer in possession of it. And
Right.
so those stories are just
They're lost.
gone.
It's the same thing with me. My mom was the keeper of the history and did all the genealogy on her side of the family. And she just knew everything. She even knew a lot about my father's side of the family because she was just good at that. And now we can't ask her because she was the one we would always turn to with questions. And then now I've forgotten a lot of what they were telling me because I wasn't paying enough
Right.
attention. And then my father was certainly, he did tell me a lot of stories just about himself growing up. And so I got those, but there were still more things that I could have asked him. And when I thought to ask him, he was dying of lung cancer. And I remember I came to him with this little recorder and I said, I want to talk to you and get some stories. And he said, I just don't feel like it right now. And I understood he was sick, he was dying, and I had waited too late for that. So yeah,
Yeah.
I would say to anybody who's watching and listening to make sure you talk to your parents and mine those stories because they really help shape who we are, who we become. And so even without knowing all of the stories, I know enough to know that I am who I am because of my parents. And I mean, growing up, I put in the dedication to this book that it was dedicated to my parents who met in a taxi cab leaving a civil rights meeting in Chicago.
Ooh,
So
will you tell
that's
me their meet cute? What do you know of
Well, I
that
don't, that's the thing I
taxi
was going to tell
cab?
you. That's what I don't know. And I'd never asked them the details. So now all these people, I put it in there. So everyone asked me now. So what were the details of it? I just know that they told me that's where they met in this taxi cab leaving this civil rights meeting. And they didn't know each other. They just happened to both hail a cab and they got in the same one. And they both lived in the same um, area, same neighborhood. So they didn't live too far apart from each other, but that's how they met and got to know each other. But I don't know the details of what happened in that cab and what happened next. And those are the things that I would like to know more about. But I know that that civil rights piece, that's part of my DNA because they were very invested in that. And then I remember on Saturday mornings growing up that I would go with them to Operation Push meetings, civil rights meetings that Reverend Jesse Jackson organized. And we would do that practically every Saturday. We would go to those meetings and I'd sit there for hours and, just listen to these civil rights leaders speak. I remember going to a rally for Harold Washington, who was elected the first black mayor of Chicago in the 1980s. And that was my first political rally, was attending that. And then the other thing that my parents and I did is we would listen to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Uh, speeches on this record player, like one of those old record players, and we had that there in the living room, and we would sit around on Saturday evenings and listen to that. And I could quote so many of his speeches back in the day. And some of that is in this book. I have the character of Darius, who's the saxophone playing activist, actually trying to mimic some of Dr. King's oratory and listening and all of that. So, and I got that from my own experiences as a child growing up.
Darius, the saxophone playing civil rights orator, who did not have a crush? When you read this book, you guys, you're going to have a crush on Darius.
Yeah, you're going to crush on
You
him.
can't help it.
You
Oh,
can't. I know.
he's
I love him. It's
he's
like I
yummy.
wanted to write the two love interests equally that you could, kind of fall for either one. So the other love interest is a medical student named Gerald. He's a medical student at Meharry Medical College. He's got all the credentials, and he's the man that Frida's parents really want her to be with and want her to marry. I won't tell you what happens there, but yeah, so she has two really good choices. And that's the thing when you write love stories and love triangles, you don't want it to be too lopsided where, one guy is just like, no, who would ever choose him? And the other one, oh yeah. I mean, so these are both um, men that, were very viable options for Frida. But the way I wrote it, that love triangle was not just a love triangle to have a love triangle, but it really spoke to the dilemma that Frida was facing in terms of whether or not to move toward activism or not.
Yeah, I won't tell people who she ends up with, but I would like to talk about this quote. Gerald, early on, so I'm not giving anything away here. Gerald says to Frida, I think they're on a date. He just says, quote, people like you and me have the whole world ahead of us, and all we have to do is be excellent. And you talk some in the book later on about the quote, the specter of black excellence. Frida's one of her college boyfriends, as you mentioned, is busy training to be a cardiologist, and another of her college potential boyfriends is busy being involved in activism, and Frida herself is trying to be excellent. She's a math major, and she's using her skills in other ways to further herself. But what you use the word specter, so what's so wrong with black folks striving for excellence?
Nothing at all is wrong with that. So much of that Black excellence piece, though, is a response to racism in America that we have to. I mean, when you're growing up Black in many homes, we are told you've got to work 10 times as hard as your white counterparts, sometimes just to get half as far. So you know where the bar is, and the bar is always very high that you have to reach as a Black person in America because you know what you're up against in this particular country. And so that's the reasoning behind excellence. And there's also this sense of pride too, right? Like we're a very proud people, a very resilient people. So we want to bring our best. We want to be excellent. And I think that's a very positive thing. But it can be a negative when it holds us back, when it's a burden and it's pressure to do something that's not really in alignment with our purpose and following our dreams and our own personal ambitions. And I think that's what we see with this Black excellence, because sometimes it's respectability politics that's at play too when we talk about Black excellence, because especially when you say, well, you can be a doctor, you can be a lawyer, you can be any of this, we have these legacy Black organizations that we can rely upon, like the NAACP and the Urban League, and all of those are great organizations, and it's very commendable and admirable to become a physician or an attorney. All of that is, but I think sometimes for Black folks, we want to just be in the world, not always trying to live up to a certain expectation and trying to surpass a certain bar that's been set for us. And so that's some of the danger, I think, of this idea of Black excellence. And also, what we do is we hold up a few figures and say that's what the excellence looks like. Like, we say we had Barack Obama as president. Okay. And so some will say, oh, you all have achieved it, right? But not really, right? Because you've got to look at the systemic issues and you have to look at the wealth gap, right? And you have to look at the Black community as a whole. Where are we, right? How much generational wealth do we have? You know, what's the employment outlook for us? Is our education system equitable? And that also speaks to um, representation when I think about Black excellence and how our communities are represented in media as well. And so for me as an author, sometimes I feel that burden of Black excellence when I'm writing characters. When I was writing The Kindest Lie, Ruth, the successful engineer, I made sure that she was a chemical engineer because we don't see many representations of Black women in these STEM fields in math and science. So I was like, oh, I want her to be a chemical engineer. And then, like you said, Frida is a mathematician. But then going back to The Kindest Lie, Ruth's brother, Eli, is this former factory worker. He's out of a job and he's spending a lot of his time at the local bar drinking away his sorrows. And I was very conflicted about writing that character of Eli because I thought, am I portraying him as this deadbeat dad because he's got kids? Kids he loves, but kids he's not able to take care of in the way that he once had. So am I uh, really putting out this negative representation and feeding into a stereotype about Black men? But what I decided was to go ahead with the story because I had so many characters from so many different perspectives, and the Black community is not a monolith, and we are very complex and we're diverse as a community. And I think when you bring details and particularity to your characters and your story, then these characters are multidimensional, right? This is Eli. Eli is not every Black man in America, right? That is just Eli Tuttle, and it's his story. Same thing with Ruth Tuttle, and that's her story.
Yeah, I appreciate that you give a range of characters. Even within this book, we're jumping back and forth between time periods. But we meet Darius, a saxophone playing activist. We meet Gerald on his way to being a cardiologist. And in the modern times, or in the modern, I'm one of those people who thinks the 90s were 10 years ago. Lord have
I
mercy,
know,
what
right?
happened?
I know. They started saying the 90s are historical fiction now, and I'm like, it can't be because that was my era, right? I was,
Right, right.
working in the 90s.
But in the modern, I'm going to stick with modern. In the
Yes.
1990s, we also meet Key, and he's a bus driving boyfriend to Tulip, and you get a range of men, and so they're not all driving buses and working as janitors, and they're not all cardiologists, but I feel like you do give us representation. And when I read The Kindest Lie and she was a chemical engineer, I'm not going to lie, I sat there and I thought, oh God, I have never read a book where a Black woman was a chemical engineer.
Did you
And
think that really?
I did.
Oh,
And
wow.
in a good way. And I'm like,
Yeah.
she's, and I didn't even notice that I've never read a book until now. It was the not noticing part. When you hear Shonda Rhimes talk about, why she did Bridgerton and how she grew up talking about she loved Pride and Prejudice. And it took me watching Bridgerton to notice how I had missed Black representation in film. And I think about that sometimes because I'm a white woman reading a book by a Black author, and sometimes I wonder, am I the audience for your book? And I think about it, and it doesn't
Wow.
actually matter if
Yeah.
I'm the audience you think of when you're writing, because these are stories that I don't have on my shelves, and I want to live in the world that you write, not necessarily the world where we're writing. And
Right. And
I'm
there's so
grateful
many
for
people
that.
who don't know that. I mean, I have several cousins who are engineers. So that's not like this is some rarity for Black folks to be
Of
in
course
engineering.
not.
And so I think it's important that you recognize what you normally see in literature, what you see in TV and film. And that's something I want to rectify and address in my writing in a very subtle way by giving Ruth in The Kindest Lie the job of chemical engineer. And for research for that character and her, because I had some scenes of her on the job, I talked with my cousin, Evan Smith, who works as a chemical engineer. He's in his 30s, young man in chemical engineering and consumer packaged goods. And I spoke with him for this book. And yeah, so I have people in my family who do this kind of work. So for me, it wasn't like I was creating something that was unusual or out of the ordinary and that I had to manufacture for the sake of fiction. This is real life, but not everybody knows it. Not everybody is exposed to this, right?
Yeah. I don't have any engineers in my family, not black ones, not white ones, not nobody. But I was grateful to meet them in your book. Hey, in your acknowledgments to this one, you also mentioned how the late Nikki Giovanni was instrumental in informing your story. Can you tell us either about the role of Nat King Cole or the Pullman Porters in the civil rights movement? Those were
Yeah.
stories I'd never heard before.
Right, right. And I don't want to give away too much
I
because I
know,
want people
that's
to
right. That's
discover
kind
it
of
in the
late in the
book.
book. You
But I
give
know
us
I
a
just want people to
hint.
discover. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But so Nikki Giovanni, the late great poet and author Nikki Giovanni, was published also by William Morrow HarperCollins, and that's my publisher as well. So I just reached out to my editor at the publishing house and said, "Do you think you can set up a call for me with her? I would love to talk with her because
Magic.
Nikki Giovanni was a student at Fisk University in the 1960s, and I knew she was steeped in activism, and so I wanted to talk to her and I wanted to hear her story." And and they did. And I had also done something on Facebook Live with HarperCollins Marketing with Nikki Giovanni too, where we were both guests. So it wasn't my first conversation with her, but anyway, they set up a call for me. It was a Zoom call. And so I was talking with her just like I'm talking with you. And I was so awestruck. And she is just the way you see her when you watch something of her. I mean, she suffers no fools, very much a straight shooter. And I just loved talking with her. And she just was such a wealth of knowledge and history. And she did talk to me about the role of the Pullman Porters. So the Pullman Porters are these men, and these primarily these African American men who were carrying bags, luggage on the trains, and shining shoes of these white passengers, and just doing all of that. And they didn't get a lot of respect always on the train, and quite often um, the passengers would call them all George, even though they knew that the person had their name badge on, and so they could see that this is actually Lionel, this is not George, right? But so much disrespect. But the beauty of the Pullman Porters is they were so dignified, and so I took care in describing their uniforms and the buttons and the just everything, the how shiny their shoes were, so many things, details that I wanted to get right about these very dignified, distinguished men. And in talking with Nikki and also reading up on it, it was these Pullman Porters who really helped a lot of Black folks rise to the middle class because this was a very coveted job. And I mentioned in the book that, the one Pullman Porter that I focus on in the book, that he was putting children, multiple children, through college, right? And so this is something that they were able to do. So it's definitely a point of pride. So I talked with Nikki Giovanni about that. And also, these Pullman Porters played a certain role in the civil rights movement that you'll read about when you read the book. And then also, she did tell me about Nat King Cole and a lot of the other entertainers of that time. And there were some misnomers about the role of Nat King Cole that you'll also learn about when you read the book. And so after I talked with Nikki about all this, I said, "Oh my God," I'm just furiously writing everything down. And I said, "I can't wait to Google this, look this up, online." And she said, "Girl, you're not going to find any of this in the history books." And so a lot of this was coming directly from Nikki Giovanni's experiences. And so she's a treasure. And I was so blessed to have the opportunity to talk with her and to hear her stories.
Oh, I'm so grateful that you did. And she sadly, I still can't quite believe that she passed away in December of last year. But if we were both late to try to capture our parents' stories, I'm glad that you had that opportunity to
I am
commune
too.
with
It was
Nikki.
so, I wish she could have read the book. But, because even when I was writing, there's a scene with Frida where she's getting on the train and she has a certain mission, and I'm not going to talk about what the mission was, but something she's doing on the train. Nikki Giovanni is the one who talked me through that and gave me kind of I would say a plausible storyline for that and how this might happen. And so I'm really, grateful to her for that.
I love that. And I'm not sure people understand the degree to which, as writers, we do rely on other writers for just a gut check or an early beta read. That we're not, yes, a lot of writing is alone in our cramped desks and we are alone with the characters in our heads, but you can't always know how a story's landing until you get and read from another author. So aside from Nikki Giovanni, who's an author who's played an important role in your storytelling?
Yes, yes. I mean, that is so important. There is no substitute for the writing community. And so for this second book, for People of Means, because I was under contract and I had a tight deadline, my mom got diagnosed with Alzheimer's during the period of me
So
writing People
sorry.
of Means. So I was behind a bit, and I didn't get a chance to have other people read it other than my editor at the publishing house, Liz Stein, who is the most incredible editor. I mean, she really takes what I put on the page and brings it to life, and also she helps me get closer to the vision of the book in my head. You never quite achieve it, but you get closer to it. So I, bow down to Liz Stein. She's amazing at William Morrow, HarperCollins. But for the first book, I had 5 different beta readers. So I had all these other writers, authors read my work, and they gave me really in-depth feedback on the book. And I couldn't have done it without them. My literary bestie is Julie Carrick Dalton.
We know her.
Yes,
Shout
we
out to
know
the
Julie.
wonderful
Shout out to
Julie Carrick
Julie.
Dalton. We're
Yes,
fans.
yes. She's the author of Waiting for the Night Song and The Last Beekeeper, and she's working on something new that'll be coming out next year, I believe. So, yes, she is incredible. She's often someone who will read my work and give me really solid feedback on it. And you need that. You really do. It's the the book doesn't get written in the early drafting phase. The real writing of a book and polishing of it is in the rewrite and the revision. That's where the book really starts to come to life. And you don't get it on your own, just you and the page. You can see it from a certain perspective, but it really takes having another set of eyes or multiple sets of eyes on that book for it to really um, be the best work that you can make it. So I say to anybody who's out there who's a writer, please, please, please don't skip the revision process. Have other people read it. And also, what I did was with these other writers who had read for me, I had Allison Hammer, author. I had Milo Todd, who's an author. Aaron Bartles, another author. Um, and I mentioned Julie Carrick Dalton that I had. So those are the ones that I can remember right now who were um, my beta readers. And so when they read for me, I knew the strengths of each one, and I didn't have them all read at one time. But once I got feedback from one of them, I would make revisions and then send it to the next person and do that. I did it kind of in that staggered fashion um, because I wanted, to have seen some growth myself in the book and in the writing, and then send it to others. And I knew certain ones would give me certain things. Some people are great at suspense, and some are great at characterization and character development. Plotting is a strength for some, and I really wanted that. And they were all so great. I mean, they would many of them would write in the margins, ha ha ha, or I'm laughing, or I can't believe that. Oh my God. And that just makes you feel so good because and that helps me to know where my writing is connecting with a reader when I see that feedback from them and that affirmation. And then they also will give you a lengthy editorial letter. So it was just golden to be able to get that kind of feedback from writers I really admire. And then, of course, I had my editor at the publishing house, Liz, doing the editing. The first book, she gave me a 6-page single-spaced editorial letter. I know. I was like, oh my God. I didn't know what to expect. So I was like, oh my gosh, I mean, this is crazy. 6 pages single spaced. And then I made those revisions. And then the next letter, so that wasn't it. The next letter was 4 pages single spaced. I was like, okay. And I made those edits. There was a third letter, and it
Oh,
was 2 pages, single space. But you see the direction it was going in, right? Yeah, so not as much revision each time. But what I appreciate about Liz is that she's going to keep working with me until we get it right. And I mean, she feels like this is her book too, and it is in many ways, right? So she wants it to be the absolute best that we can get it. And because of everything that was going on in my life, we didn't get the book turned in at the original date, so it didn't publish as early as we had planned. And Liz really was the one who encouraged me, let's wait and give it the time it needs. And and that's what we did. And I'm so grateful that we waited. I've had so many people since People of Means has come out, people who know me and have read both books who said, "Oh my God, I love People of Means even more than The Kindest Lie." And so I think that's so interesting to hear. And I was just emailing with Liz, my editor, about that today, and she said, "You never know what readers are gonna connect with." And she said maybe they're seeing more confidence on the page in the second book, but who knows? But I said it's like I don't have children, but I'm like, I guess it'd be like my children. I can't choose between them, like which one is my favorite. Uh, and Liz said she's the same way. She can't really choose a favorite between them, but we love them both in their own way. And we're just glad that readers are connecting with both of them. And the beauty of having a second book is people are going back and reading the backlist. So they're discovering The Kindest Lie, which is wonderful.
that is wonderful. I always love it when I quote unquote discover a writer and then find out they've written something else that I can go and read
Yes.
my way through their catalog. And you're so right about the revision partners because so much about what I've written of a character, it's in my head. So I'll have someone in those early reads be like, wait a minute, how come, what is he doing now? I'm like, well, it's because of this. And they're like, well, you never said that. I'm like, oh, because you're carrying it in your head
In your
and
head, right? And
you
you
forgot to
never put
tell
it on the
them,
page, right?
right?
You know it, but
It wasn't
nobody
there.
else knows it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
so they catch that stuff that we would never catch. And then copy editors. I didn't even mention copy editors. They're gold. They're worth their weight in gold too. Thinking about the one copy editor that I had for The Kindest Lie, uh, I had Ruth, the chemical engineer, sitting next to her grandmother, the character of Mama. I said they are sitting next to each other in the living room, and the copy editor puts in the notes in the margins. She said, "Okay, you said Ruth and Mama are sitting next to each other. One is on a chair and the other one you said is on a couch. Is the couch and the chair, are they right next to each other? Or if they're perpendicular, they're not sitting next to each other." And I was like, oh my God. Like that's the level of detail and, what we frankly think of as minutia that the copy editors really get into. And I was like, oh my God. And then also the other thing that was interesting was I had flashback of Ruth giving birth to her child when she was a teenager. This was in 1997. And I don't remember the exact months right now, but but this was pretty much the deal. I had her listening to a certain song when she was giving birth at home. And I had looked that song up, and that song is a song that came out in 1997. But the month we were in, the song hadn't come out in that month yet, is what the copy editor told me. Said, yep, it came out in 1997, but not yet. Not when she was giving birth. That song was not out yet. So these are the things that they find for you. A good copy editor will. So it's more than just, I think people think copy editor, they think, oh, just correcting grammar and spelling. Yeah, they're going to get that stuff, but no, it's all those other details that have to hang together and make sense. But there was one thing nobody caught, and that's a mistake in The Kindest Lie.
Ooh, what is it?
I
I
know
didn't
it's like
catch
it
it.
bothers me to this day, but it's like there's nothing I can do about it. And actually, only one person has ever brought it up to me, which I'm so shocked. I start the book off on the election night of Barack Obama. And I set that in Chicago watch night party. And I said, snow was falling. And actually, in Chicago, and see, I was living in Florida at the time. So I wasn't there. I wasn't here in Chicago because I'm from Chicago, but I wasn't living here at the time. But I later found out from another author who mentions it to me actually just before we went on to some event, virtual event. And I was like, oh my God. So I could hardly enjoy the event because I was thinking about this error. She said, I live here in Chicago. And she said it was one of the hottest days that we normally have in November. And so it was very balmy and there was no snow. It was just a kind of a warm evening. And so I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I made that error. But no one else caught that about the weather. And so I try to look up weather now, like for people of means, there was a snow, kind of a heavy snow around the time there was like, so I have a snowball fight on campus because it was a rare snow. And I was able to look up when that was and put that in there. But so now I'm so conscious of weather and gosh, and not getting that wrong. But it was a minor part of the story to say snow was falling. It was this minor detail, but it was one that I can't change now.
No, and I think that actually it's good to have. My brother's a an editor, and he always says you get one for free, and
Yep.
there's one for free in every book, and if you don't know what it is, it's still in there, and you don't know.
You
So
don't know what it is.
you get one for free. And the truth of the writing, I've been working on a contemporary novel, and I set a scene on Lake Erie because it froze a couple of years ago, and so when I was writing the book, it was frozen at the time the scene was happening. But gosh darn it, all these years since, Lake Erie's not been freezing. And so it was just this past winter that Lake Erie was freezing again. And I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to move the scene to there. But stuff changes, you know? So if stories aren't written all at once, so especially if you're working on something contemporary, what the kid's favorite Disney cartoon was, well, sure, it might be frozen now, but 3 years from now, when the book goes to publication, Frozen wouldn't have been what the child was watching, and you got to update it.
No.
So those copy
Right.
editors are gold for
They really are.
keeping you honest
They are.
about
And
those
then when you have
things.
your other people read for blurbs, I had somebody read for a blurb who found something in People of Means that I was able to change, before publication because she was reading an uncorrected proof of it. And yeah, it was something about a crop that grows in a certain area in the South, and she happened to be from that area, and so she was able to tell me that no, no, that crop is not right. And I had done my online research, but I still can make a mistake, and not find a good source. So I certainly went with her, and I changed the crop to one that actually grows in that area.
Oh my goodness, the labor of love that is
It
writing.
is. It is. That's the thing, because people think, oh, you're writing fiction. This is not nonfiction, so you don't have to worry about all that. But you really do, because you don't want someone to read a book and say, well, even though this is fiction, I mean, this is not plausible. That would never have happened. I know that's not to be true. And then people are not really invested in your story anymore because they think, this is not, yeah, she didn't do her work. And then you're thinking about the things that are not right, that are inaccurate, instead of falling into the story and the characters the way I need you to.
Sure. Hey, I know we're not supposed to judge books by covers, but you have great covers for both The Kindest Lie and People of Means. Did you have any input on those cover designs?
I did have input, yes. So my editor, Liz, had me do a Pinterest board of covers that I like and covers that I don't like. And this was my first foray into historical fiction. And there's a certain look to many historical fiction books, with a woman and just a certain look to those. And I didn't want that. I didn't want that traditional historical fiction look. And we wanted to stick with more of that artistic look that The Kindest Lie had. And so that's what we did. And I had same cover designer both times, Ploy Sirapont, who was incredible. And Liz, what happens is Liz then sent me um, like a mock-up of what Ploy had come up with. And I was happy with what I first saw, but then I was able to help with the tweaking of the cover. And so that was good to be able to, to say, oh, okay, I'd like to make a change here. So we have a drawing of a woman, and she's supposed to represent Frida. She's in this blue dress, and at first the hairstyle made her look like an old lady, and she's supposed to be a college student in this image. And so we gave her a little bit of the hair flip, which was kind of popular in the 60s. And then also we put her hand on her hip, and you could just tell she was kind of feisty, and she's a woman with a mind of her own. And so we definitely made some changes to the woman. And then I didn't know how they were going to represent the 90s, but they represented that not with a drawing of a person, but with a boombox and gold hoop earrings, which were popular in that era. And so that was pretty cool to see that representation. And then you have these lines that are going through that they kind of show a division, but then they also show a coming together too. So it's kind of works in both ways. So I'm very happy with the cover. The colors are very vibrant and um, it really stands out. And then the title also is a title, People of Means, is one that I came up with. I got so lucky. I have so many author friends who go through, they have to come up with like 15, 20 different titles. They go through multiple iterations with their editors, with their sales and marketing teams, and it's just a painful process of trying to get to the right title. People of Means was my first choice for a title. It's the one I submitted when I turned the manuscript in, and it never changed. And so I was like, you're holding your breath, hoping that no one will say, let's go with anything different. I like titles that work on multiple levels. For one, People of Means is referring to the higher socioeconomic status of Frida and Tulip and their family. But then on a deeper level, for me, it's about the capacity that each of us has to love, to engage, to be a part of something, to live out our own individual purpose, to do things in our own small ways, in our own sphere of influence, to make a difference in the world positively. And I think by that definition, we are all people of means. And that was a point that I really wanted to make with that particular title. And I also thought it was kind of subversive for me to title a book that centers Black people, people of means, because it's not something that I think the wider society automatically thinks of when they think of people of means. But I was encouraged and empowered by what Tayari Jones, the author, did with An American Marriage. And I think that was her editor's pick for a title. And I think she asked him, are you sure about this? Can I really call this book about, this Black couple, the husband who's incarcerated, and then the wife, can I call that, an American Marriage? And he was like, yeah, it is. I mean, it's dealing with our criminal justice system, the prison industrial complex, and it's dealing with, you know, people who are American, and it's a very American story. And so I feel the same way about People of Means, that it was just the right title. And I also love that when I first announced the book in social media, I had several Black authors kind of high-fiving me and saying, I like that title. I like that. It's just a point of pride to have that title as well.
Yeah, I love it. And I'll make sure to not just link to the book, but I'll show people the cover when we put this up. We always close with a couple of fan favorites, just quick questions to get another view of the author behind the author. These first ones are multiple choice, okay? Just pick one.
Okay.
All right, coffee or tea?
Ooh, tea, but I prefer hot chocolate.
Ooh, I'm gonna add
So I
that
would put
in.
another option in there because
All
I'm a hot
right.
chocolate girl, hot cocoa.
That's nice. Mountains or beach?
God, that's hard. I think I'm going to go with the mountains.
Got it. Because that's where you can drink your hot chocolate.
I could be my hot chocolate there. Yes, yes. I did. I tried mountain climbing once, and I'd like to try that again. So that's why I say mountains. It was something that I did when I was a journalist as part of a story. Never would have done it before, but I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. Once I did it and I was at the top looking down, I'm like, it felt so good to have done that.
That's excellent. I like the way that journalists are often kind of pushed outside of their comfort zones to get the
Yes.
story. So,
Yes. And I had on like a little heel too. So I surely probably shouldn't have done it
mountain
in
climbing in a
that.
heel.
Probably not. And I did because they put me on the story and I had to just drive over and I didn't know what I was going to be doing that day and I didn't have my gym shoes with me.
That's excellent. A few more. Are you an early bird or a night owl?
Early bird. Yeah. And that's where I do my best writing and thinking is in the morning.
Yeah. Are you a risk taker or the person who always knows where the band-aids are?
I know where the band-aids are, but I'm getting more comfortable with risk and I'm liking risk. I'm moving closer to being that risk taker in my life
I like it.
because that's where the fun is.
Sure, sure. Chicago Bulls or the Northwestern Wildcats?
Oh, wow. I'll say the Chicago Bulls, just because I talk about the Chicago Bulls, and you'll read about the Chicago Bulls and their repeat season in People of Means. And when I was, in that era, that was such a huge deal for me, the Bulls. And so I have to pick the Bulls.
Sure. Growing up here in Cleveland, I just remember getting beat by the Chicago Bulls in shot after
Yeah,
game winning
yes,
shot.
during
So,
the Jordan glory
oh,
years.
Yes.
Yes.
Run DMC or Sugar Hill Gang?
Oh, wow. That's a tough one. I'll say Run DMC.
Gotcha. This is a fill in the blank. If you weren't working as a writer and you had a little magic, what would you do instead?
Oh, I'd probably be a filmmaker. I love Ava DuVernay, the filmmaker. I would be doing what she's doing, making films. So still storytelling, telling stories on the large and small screen. That's what I would be doing, behind the camera and just seeing things and bringing all of these scenes to life for people and really shaping the culture because that's a lot of what she's doing is shaping culture and I love it.
Well, both of your books are incredibly cinematic, so hopefully we'll just
Yes,
see your
Ava, are
risk
you watching?
taking.
Maybe you can.
Yes. Risk taking plus these books plus your vision and a little magic. I'd love to see them on the screen.
Oh, I love that. Yes, yes. Thank you so, so much.
Sure,
This has been
sure.
such a pleasure. I'm so glad that we got to do this and you made it so easy. And thank you for loving my books and bringing them to the world.
Yeah, you're welcome. Hey, I got one last question, which is just
Oh,
if we
okay.
were to take a picture of you really happy doing something you love, what would we see?
Ooh, wow. Really happy. In a Really, it was last night, um, in a room full of readers who are telling me that they've read my work and that they love my work, or that after hearing me talk about People of Means and The Kindest Lie, they can't wait to read it. And those readers telling me, because I was in a room full of all white readers in Waterford, Wisconsin, I was the only black person in the room, and they were all just telling me that, I help them see the world through a different perspective and to walk in someone else's shoes. And they were just so warm and so welcoming. And we had the best conversations and we hugged each other. And I just felt like, wow, this is why I do what I do. This is why I write. And yeah, my heart is so full.
Oh, I'm so grateful to know that. Hey, in the acknowledgments of this most recent book, you wrote that your greatest hope for it would be to inspire readers to, quote, live boldly and on purpose. And so thank you for your vision and for marching boldly in here to spend time with us today.
Thank you so much, Anne Marie, for having me.
You're welcome. Folks, our guest today has been Nancy Johnson, whose most recent book is People of Means. It's available at a library or an indie shop near you. To everyone listening, we're wishing you love and light wherever the day takes you. Be good to yourself, be good to one another, and we'll see you again soon on this wild and precious journey.